Okay, so this is where we are. We're looking at max flow problem. So you know the problem, the directed graph sourcing capacities on the edges. We want to send as much flow from S to T. We saw a very simple Ford-Fulkerson algorithm whose running time is m times this maximum flow, and we saw examples where it could be as bad as this. Right? You might send a flow of 1 unit every time in the worst case if you're not very careful about what kind of augmenting path you're looking at. But this is still good enough for various applications. For example, we can find a maximum bipartite matching in the graph, and the maximum flow would be at most n, so it's still okay. We saw Menger's theorem, which tells you maximum number of edge disjoint paths from S to T is equal to minimum number of edges you need to delete to separate S and T. You can prove using Max-Flow-Minka theorem. And we saw an example of teams and scores, and you want to figure out whether your favorite team has been eliminated already, given whatever matches are left. At the face of it, doesn't seem like a flow problem. We saw that we could model it as a flow and run the max flow algorithm and answer this question. And the big combinatorial theorem underlying the correctness of the algorithm is the Max-Flow-Minka theorem, which tells you that when you reach max flow, you also get for free the min capacity ST cut. Okay, so all that we have seen over 2 lectures. Yeah. So today we'll get to, there may be more applications we'll see, but today we want to get to improving the running time of the algorithm by being careful about the kind of augmenting paths we want to choose. Right? So, for example, we saw that some large number here. For this, we know if you want, we can just do 2 augmentations and be done with it. But if you're unlucky and if your augmenting path chooses this, then your bottleneck capacity is 1 and you will send 1. And then this edge will come to the residual network, so you might augment flow through this, which is again bottlenecked by the capacity of 1, and so on. So we want to get around this and think of good paths to choose for your augmenting paths. Right? So there will be 2 heuristics we'll try. One is, so one idea is choose an ST path in the residual network with largest bottleneck capacity. Right? The bottleneck capacity is the smallest capacity in the ST path. Because that's what limits you is how much you can send the flow. So among various ST paths, find an ST path which has the largest bottleneck capacity and augment your path, augment your flow through that path is one idea. But then the problem is to find such a thing, right? You just have to do some BFS or something and find all possible ST paths. So we're going to avoid that by doing the following little approximation. What we'll do is, so instead, we'll have a scaling parameter delta. And augment flow by at least delta if possible. So, and if this is not possible, so okay, so what are we going to do? It's sort of implementing this idea, but trying to avoid finding the largest bottleneck capacity. So, what are we going to do? Okay, so here's the algorithm, right? Let's define the residue. So you have a flow F and the capacity and the parameter delta is the residual graph with residual capacities greater than or equal to delta. Okay, delta is some parameter, we'll figure out how to choose that. So when I'm constructing the residual graph, remember how do we construct the residual graph? Whenever you have a flow in one direction, whatever the remaining capacity of the edge, you will put that edge, if the edge is not saturated, put that edge with the residual capacity and put the reverse edge with whatever the flow value. Okay, that's a residual network. So now I'm going to do an extra thing, which is that whenever the residual capacity is less than delta, don't put it in the graph. That's all. Okay, this makes life easier. It's easy to construct this graph. You just go construct your residual network as you would do, and whenever your residual capacity is less than delta, just don't add that edge. Okay, so you can construct it in order m time. Now you find an ST augmenting path here and augment the flow. Now you are ensured that you will augment it by at least delta, because every edge has residual capacity delta. The only problem is that you may not have an ST path here. Then we will, should we increase or decrease delta? Decrease delta. Allow more edges to come in, because when you decrease delta, more edges will come in. Find an augmenting path here and keep decreasing delta, and eventually you are, if you decrease delta small enough, the final residual network would be the same as the standard residual network, and it will all work fine. Okay, so here is the algorithm. So initialize. So f is 0 for all edges. This is how we. Okay, we'll figure out how to construct my initiate delta while delta is greater than or equal to 1. Construct GF delta while there exists an ST path in GF delta, augment by max flow possible in that path. Then we'll construct GF delta. So as long as there is an ST path in this GF delta, we'll keep augmenting it this way. So maybe this, maybe this makes sense. So this is we'll keep applying this while loop, right? If I find an ST path, augment the flow, I get my new flow, new GF delta, find an ST path, keep doing it, and this process stops when in this there is no ST path in GF delta. And then you come back here, delta we will decrease. So we're going to do it by a factor of 2 all the time. So that's what it is. So when you get out of this while loop, there is no ST path in GF delta. So I will reduce my delta and go back again here and see, construct a GF delta, find a path, and keep doing it as long as delta is greater than or equal to 1. So what is the initial value of delta I want? So we're going to do max of capacity of SU. So of all the edges coming out of S, pick the one which has the maximum capacity, and that's going to be my initial delta. But I'll keep delta to be a power of 2 so that I don't have to, it'll always be an integer and I don't have to deal with fractions here. So choose, okay, so my delta would be log of this floor 2 power that. Okay, so take the max value, take the log of that and take 2 power that, 2 power some ceiling, right? So it's a power of 2, and so it's ensured that it's less than or equal to max of CS here. And it's the largest power of 2. So another way to think about it is that this is the largest power of 2 less than or equal to max C S C. U in B minus S, comma T.
Sir, yep. There is a difference between the capacity of the neighbor of source, edge of source and edge of the terminal.
Yeah.
So then we have to reduce delta for many times. If there we get the maximum of ACU and VT.
Yeah, I mean we can. But doesn't matter actually. I mean, you could pick, in fact, even delta equal to sum of all the capacities. Even that's also fine. All the capacities you want. But what I want to argue is that if I call this number as some C, then you have to do at most log C many iterations in the bigger while loop, because quickly it will become, your delta will become 1. Right. So let's put the goal here. This is the benchmark we want to improve. So is the algorithm clear? So I start with some big delta and construct a graph which has residual capacity. I mean, start with an initial flow, and residual capacity is larger than delta. Find an ST path, because then I can augment by larger numbers. When I cannot, I come back and decrease delta by a factor of 2. Now construct my GF and keep doing it until my delta becomes 1, and then if you don't have any path, then you have to get out. Okay. Now, is the correctness obvious that finally when you stop, you actually have a max flow? Why is when you stop, I mean, our hope is that the running time is much better than this. We'll come to that. But first, let's make sure that we have a correct algorithm. This is actually an implementation of Ford-Fulkerson. Really, why is it correct? What's a sort of a one-line argument for correctness?
If you set delta to 1,
when you set delta to 1, GF delta is the same as GF, right? Because we are working with integral capacities. Let's also assume, yeah, we are working with integral capacities. So the flows will always be the residual capacities. As long as the residual GF will have all edges with residual capacity strictly positive. That's a definition, right? All I'm saying here is when delta is 1, it's strictly greater than or equal to 1. They are the same, right? So when delta equal to 1, GF delta is equal to GF. So when you get out of the algorithm, you have a flow such that there is no ST path in the residual network, the standard residual network. And we know that when that happens, we have reached max flow. Okay, so correctness is fine. So runtime, let's see how many iterations I'm going to go through external while loop and internal while loop. Right? So external while loop, so if I call this number as C, then how many iterations you want to do? Log C, right? At most, or ceiling log C, maybe +1. Now the question is how many augmentations I might do inside. And the hope is that you will not do too much because every time when you augment, you're augmenting by a big number, some big delta, right? So that means that you won't have to do this. You won't do too many augmentations. So let's try and, so this is, so for analyzing the internal while loop, let's prove it. For a fixed delta, number of augmentations is at most 2m. So, okay, the way we will prove is that suppose you augment, you finish, you find, you fixed a delta, did a lot of augmentations, found there is no ST path in your GF delta. And I want to claim that at that point you are already pretty close to the max flow. What you are off by is a small quantity. So when you do your delta by 2 and augment, you won't have, even if you do too many augmentations, you will reach max flow already anyway. Okay, so what we are going to do? So we will prove by using the following claim. If there is no ST path in GF delta, then max flow is at most F plus M delta. So you are at the current flow, and you found out that in your GF delta, for a fixed delta, there is no ST path. And I claim then that you are at this flow, the maximum flow is never more than M times delta. Okay, I will argue this. This requires a proof. Very similar to how we argue that when you reached when there is no augmenting path, we argue that you reach the max flow, right? Using the same kind of an argument, we will show that for a fixed delta, if you reached a flow where there is no augmenting path in GF delta, then the optimum flow is never more than m delta from your current f. Okay, but let's assume this claim. This claim would require few lines of proof. Let's just complete the analysis. Is this now? Does this from here? Does this lemma follow? I mean, for any fixed delta. So this at any point of time, whatever your delta is, see, initially it's true. Why? Because, I mean, let's fix a delta. And you have these edges going. First of all, any edge out of S, this edge will not participate in more than one augmentation for a fixed delta. Let's argue why, right? Because initially when I start off, delta is basically the max value of these edges, right? So suppose I manage to use this and augment a flow. So this edge is used in the flow. Then after that, its capacity will come down by less than delta, right? Because I can't have two delta. I mean, this is already the largest power of 2 less than or equal to the max value is my delta. So if I have augmented by this, it's that means that it was already delta. Now if I remove a delta, I cannot have another capacity of delta. Okay, and so this edge. So I might have this edge with delta here, but this edge will not be used more than once. Any edge out of S will not be used more than once in the augmentation because its residual capacity will come down by delta, strictly less than delta. So it's initially true. The number of augmentations is less than or equal to, in fact, considerably less than 2m initially. Suppose you have a fixed delta and you've done some various augmentations and you have a current flow F. Okay, so then we know if this claim is true, the maximum flow possible is F plus m delta. Now when I come down to the next phase of scaling, my delta will be delta by 2, right? Now when I do an augmentation, I am augmenting by delta by 2. So it started off with F, now I augment by delta by 2. The flow increases by at least delta by 2. But this claim tells you my F star is never more than F plus m delta. So if I do 2m many augmentations, I would have reached F star. Because 2m into delta by 2 is m delta. So I start off with F at the beginning of this phase of the scaling. And every time when I do an augment, my flow increases by delta by 2. But this claim tells me that the maximum flow is never more than where you started off plus m times delta. So you will not do more than 2m many augmentations. Right? So that's what this lemma would tell you. Okay? So we have that this is at most 2m many augmentations in particular loop. So what is the overall running time? We have log C outside and then 2m augmentations inside, and each augmentation takes order m time, right? It's constructing the residual network and finding the path. So I'm going to multiply by this. So that's the running time. So let me remove this. This is the runtime. Modulo the proof of this claim we need to go through, but we have reduced. So I have to sacrifice a factor of m here. This m becomes n square, but now it is log of the max value out of S. Okay. So this could be considered a polynomial time algorithm. This is not, because this f star can be pretty large, but this is polynomial in the input size. Okay, if you care about this, because log C is the number of bits required to write down these. So you could, as I said, instead of talking about max value out of this, you can say max value in the entire network if you care. It's okay. Then it's n square times log C. So if C is very, very large, then this algorithm may be better than MF star. Okay. It still is not a purely strongly polynomial time in the sense that, okay, so let me just say this thing's poly time, polynomial in input size, which means that if I write down these numbers, the capacities in binary, then log of the values is the number of bits I need to write down these numbers. Polynomial in log of that is still a polynomial runtime. But what I would really want strongly polynomial time is just poly in n and m. It does not depend on the numbers on the capacities. Okay, we will get to this kind of an algorithm next. Okay, but I still have to give you a proof of this claim. Okay, just to summarize, here is the algorithm. We're going to augment by large numbers at every time. We use this scalar, this parameter to decide what large means. We construct a residual network where the residual capacities are large. And if you don't find a path, then you weaken your parameter, so more edges will come in, and you will do these augmentations. And when delta is 1 and you don't find a path, you get out, the correctness follows. Number of times you're doing the scaling is log C, and number of augmentations possible is at most 2m because of this claim that since you're augmenting by large numbers, you're pretty close to f star already at the end of one scaling. So that running time is something like this. Okay, so let's try and prove this claim, because this is again, it will be sort of like a revision of correctness of max flow algorithm itself. So let's go over this. Okay, and then the next half of the lecture, I'll get on to a different algorithm using a different heuristic that will not have any dependence on the numbers at all. It just depends only on m and n. So proof of claim. So it's pretty mechanical, and this is what I want you to gain some practice on. So let's see how I would do. So there is no ST path in GF delta. Then I want to show that max flow is at most this. We will give a cut such that capacity of the cut is at most f plus m delta. If I do that, then we know that the max flow is bounded by the capacity of any cut, right? Any flow, any cut, we know that the flow is bounded above by the capacity of the cut. So in particular, the max flow will be bounded by that cut value, which is at post f plus m delta. Okay, so what should be that cut? You're told this. Recall how we exhibited the cut for max flow min cut.
Set of vertices, each
in
in GF.
GF delta.
Now here.
It's GF delta, right? That's where I know there is no ST path. So A would be set of vertices reachable from S in GF delta, and B would be B minus A. So clearly S is here, T is here, because there is no ST path. Now let's look at the capacity. So what is the flow across this, right? So here is my A, and this is B. Let's look at the flow across this cut, which is my current flow, right? Because this is another thing, small lemma we proved, is that if you have a flow and you have any cut, then flow across, what goes out minus what goes in is exactly equal to the value of the flow, right? So it is flow out of A minus flow in A. Okay, let's look at the edges in this direction, right? What is their residual capacity? If UB is in H, U in A, B in B, we can call it CF of UB, the residual capacity. Can we say something about it? This is the flow minus its capacity, but we know something about it. Sorry, capacity minus its flow. In?
From A to B.
In where? In which graph? In GF delta.
Yeah,
Because that's where there is no ST path.
Yeah.
So in GF delta, this edge is not there. If I look at an edge, goes from here to here, this edge is not there in GF delta, because if it is there, then I could have pulled this vertex also into A because it's reachable from S and so on. So this edge is not in GF delta. What does that mean? Its residual capacity is strictly less than delta. Right? By definition of GF delta, you're going to put edges only whose residual capacities are greater than or equal to delta. So this is strictly less than delta. Okay, and similarly, if you have an edge this way, then flow in that edge is strictly less than delta, because whenever you have some flow here, I will put that, the reverse edge, with whatever the flow as the residual capacity in the reverse direction. So if this value is greater than delta, then this would appear in GF delta. Since it does not appear in GF delta, for any edge like this, its flow is less than delta. U is in B and B is in A, then flow across UV is strictly less than delta. So F, which is equal to F out of A minus F in of A, is equal to, what do we know about F out of A? For every such edge, its flow is greater than capacity minus delta, right? This capacity minus F is less than delta, so that means its flow is greater than capacity is minus delta. And for any such edge coming in this direction, its flow is strictly less than delta. So it's minus but this is strictly less than delta, so I can write this capacity of the cut AB. This is exactly the capacity of the cut AB. When you talk about capacity, it's only going from edges from A to B minus delta. Here also is delta because of this. Summation U in A, V in B are basically, or UV is across AB. One. Okay, so this is basically greater than its capacity of the edge minus, I'm going to just give an upper bound of M delta, which implies that capacity of the edge is less than F plus M delta. And that's what we wanted to show. Okay, it's actually strictly less than. And as I said, it's just mechanical. You know that there is no ST path. There is only one thing you can assume, that get this cut and all the forward edges. Earlier, we know that it was all saturated if it is a GF. But here, what we know is that these edges have residual capacity strictly less than delta because they don't appear in GF delta. So this statement is true. And for every such edge here, the flow is strictly less than delta. So the F out minus FA, you just put this minus delta minus this and do some calculations and you get this. Since I produced you a cut whose value is less than F plus M delta, the max flow is at most F plus M delta. This follows, so this follows, and we have the running time. Yeah.
Just looking at the algorithm, what we're doing, while there exists an ST path in GF delta, we are augmenting. Okay. So as we said earlier, that every edge for particular fixed value of delta, every edge can participate at most once.
No, that was only for
Something
edges out of S, I was saying.
for S. Now, degree of S is say at most n minus 1.
Yeah, n minus 1, right.
For augmenting, I'm order in time. So what I am saying, if we express it by some recursive relation, T delta is equal to T delta by 2 plus order of m square, then we are getting order of m square log c.
Yeah, m square log c. Yeah.
Can we express it that way? That T delta for some fixed delta, we are using at most order of m square time. Like what we're
Sure.
doing while
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's order m augmentations, each augmentation taking order m times. It's n square time.
Each augmentation time order of m time, at most order of m, but we have done like
Yeah.
every.
So it's T delta is m square plus. Yeah, but in the first term there is no delta. That's the only reason. So it's the same as saying for every delta it's a n square time. And there are log c many deltas, so overall it's m square log c. That's it. I mean, there is really no recursion happening as such.
Like if I define my problem such a way where capacities can be at most delta, T delta, I'm defining it the time to
the not capacities are not at most delta. The augmentations are happening by at least delta.
Actually, I'm assuming that bottleneck of an edge is lesser equal to delta. So running time of that T delta is equal to using order of m square time. I'm reducing it to a problem of delta by 2.
Yeah, no, all I'm saying is when you write this, okay, so you're saying I can do something like, sorry, T delta is n square plus T delta by 2. I mean, this term has no delta in it here, really. So, I mean, you could write it and analyze it this way, or the way you can analyze it, they are the same, because there is no delta here. You know, m square times log delta. That's what it is. And that delta initially is at most c is n square log c. Yeah. Okay, so this kind of a cut argument I want you to be familiar with, because it's going to be useful in the assignments. For example, when you talk about proving Hall's theorem using this. We did this when we were doing that IPL score elimination, right? If the max flow is less, let's assume max flow is a certain value, then you know there is a min cut, and we make some assumptions on the cut, get down the capacity, how the cut will look like, write down the capacity, and then argue something about it, right? So that's an useful thing. Okay, so now let's get to a purely strongly polynomial time algorithm, and this is due to Edmonds and Karp. And here the idea is simply augmented through a shortest path, that's all. Okay. But why it works so well needs a careful argument. So this is I think this is n squared n. We'll check this out. We'll put a question mark. So here the idea is augment through a shortest ST path. That's all. Okay. So start with an initial flow at 0, construct the residual network, find the shortest ST path, where by shortest we mean fewest number of edges, right? The capacities have no role here. Okay. So shortest means number of edges. Augment it and keep augmenting, and then we will argue that the number of augmentations and each augmentation takes an m time. Right? How do you find the shortest ST path? BFS. Okay? Because it's unweighted. You want to use Dijkstra if it is weighted, and it costs you more because you need to do some heaps and so on. But if you're talking about unweighted, then you just run BFS, right? And BFS, so it takes order m time, or m plus n. And since the number of augmentations is order mn, and overall running time is m squared. So this requires 2 pages of proofs. Okay, so we'll go through that. And okay, so the first lemma towards proving this claim. So the correctness again follows from Ford-Fulkerson algorithm, right? We're not doing, this is again, think of it as another implementation of Ford-Fulkerson. Ford-Fulkerson says just find any path, and when there is no path, and you got max flow, and we are saying that just do augment through shortest path. So okay, so this lemma is that after every augmentation, the length of the shortest path from S to any V in B minus ST never decreases. Okay, so this is lemma 1. So you start with zero flow, you augment through a shortest path. You have a new flow, construct a new residual network. In the new residual network, look at the length of the shortest paths from S to every vertex. Either it remains the same or it increases but never decreases. Okay. Let's assume this, we'll come back to proving this. So remember that example where we were this famous example. I mean, if you look at this edge was involved in every augmentation if we didn't do shortest path, right? And that is what made huge number of augmentations. But we will say that, we will argue that if you do shortest path augmentation, an edge is involved in at most n by 2 augmentations. Okay, is that true? Is that what I want to say? Yeah. And from lemma 2, the claim would follow. Right? Because the number of augmentations, if you look at, there are m edges in the graph, and every edge is never involved in more than n many augmentations, order n many augmentations. So it will be at most m n augmentations. Okay, it's very conservative upper bound. In fact, in one augmentation, there are a lot of edges involved. But even if you are doing a conservative estimate, one edge is involved in at most n by 2 augmentations. So m edges, mn number of augmentations. So let's try and prove lemma 2 assuming lemma 1, and then we'll try and prove lemma 1. Okay. Okay, so proof of lemma 2. And when I say an edge here, with the direction, right? There are order m edges. We're talking about direction. So let's say, suppose, consider So no, let me change it. Sorry, I'm not sure this is true. An edge is critical n at most n by 2 augmentation. So what do I mean by critical? Is an edge with bottleneck capacity. Right? So when you do an ST path, so I'm doing a shortest path, ST path, and an edge is a critical edge if it gets saturated in this augmentation, which means that this is the one which has the minimum capacity, residual capacity in that path. So I am going to augment through flow through that, and this edge becomes saturated. That's what it is, right? So now I claim that you look at an edge UV. This edge can become critical multiple times, can it? Yes, because it gets saturated here, and then maybe it comes back again, and then it can become critical again, and it can happen multiple times. So all I'm saying is an edge is critical in at most n by 2 augmentations. Okay, and every augmentation has some edge which is critical, right? Because that's how we augment. We find the maximum possible we can allow and send flow. So one of those edges will become critical. So every augmentation has some edge critical. So this claim is still true. Okay? Even though I changed the statement, this claim is still true because you take an augmentation, some edge becomes critical in that augmentation, map that, associate that augmentation to that edge. Then this function, number of, you cannot map the same edge more than n by 2 times. So the number of augmentations would be still mn. Okay, so let's try and prove this. Consider two consecutive critical augmentations, consecutive times when an edge UV becomes critical. When I'm not, by consecutive, I don't mean necessarily next to each other. So what I mean is the following, that so I have a GF and I find this shortest path, and this is my edge UV, and it's become critical. Okay. Then somewhere later, GF prime UV again becomes critical. Okay. So let's take these two consecutive times, and there may be a lot of other flows in between, but where UV was not critical, but let's look at two consecutive times UV became critical. So it was GF and GF prime. So at this, when you're augmenting the flow by this thing, UV has become critical, so this edge will go away because it will be saturated. So it will not come in the immediate next residual network. So how does it come again here?
Flow in the residual.
So there was some flow sent from V to U in some GF double prime, which brought the edge UV back again, right? Okay, so now let's use the fact that we are always augmenting by the shortest path, right? And we'll use lemma 1. Okay, so let me Okay, so I don't even, this is, so you have GF which had this, and then you augmented it, and then at somewhere there was a flow through this in GF double prime, and we've reached this place and where UV is becoming critical. Let's use the fact that you're always augmenting through shortest paths. So the length of the distance from in GF from S to V is equal to the distance in F from S to U plus 1. But in F double prime, S to U is equal to dF double prime S to V plus 1, because these are shortest paths lengths. Now, why is this true? That I'm saying that in F double prime, the length of the path from S to V is greater than or equal to whatever it was from S to V by lemma 1, right? This is by lemma 1. The shortest paths are increasing. Okay, so so what I have is dF double prime SU is greater than or equal to dF SV plus 1, but dF SV is, which is equal to dF SU plus 2. So what has happened is that the length of the shortest, so here is a place UV is becoming critical. The shortest paths are increasing. So yeah, and dF prime so here, so UV is becoming critical again. The length of the shortest path from S to U here is greater than or equal to the length of the shortest path from S to U when UV was critical before, plus 2. Okay, so here is a place where UV was critical, and here is the next time where UV is critical, but the length of the shortest path from S to U is increased by a distance of at least 2. Okay, now it cannot keep on increasing, right? So you know that the length of the shortest path from S to U is at most n minus 2. It starts out, whatever it starts out, it keeps on between two consecutive occasions of criticality of that edge, the length of the shortest path increases by at least 2. So it cannot become critical in more than n by 2 augmentation. Actually, more precisely, n minus 2 by 2 augmentations. Because by that time, the shortest path length would reach n minus 2, and it cannot go beyond that. Okay, so the crucial thing is that when it's critical, it goes out of the residual network. So for it to come back, you should have sent some flow through this. But we are always augmenting through shortest paths. So the length of the shortest path, we can argue about it and say that for length of the shortest path to U increases by at least 2 between every consecutive time the UV edge becomes critical. So UV edge, any particular edge, cannot become critical more than n minus 2 by 2 times. So shortest path length increases by at least 2. Okay, more or less, so this proves lemma 2, assuming lemma 1, and everything else about running time follows. So we just have to prove lemma 1, and lemma 1 follows very similar lines. Because we are always augmenting through shortest path, some calculations like this will tell you that the shortest paths lengths are never decrease. Okay, so let's quickly go through that. Between okay, so suppose not, we'll arrive at contradiction, right? Suppose there exists V such that after an augmentation, there exists F V okay. So I have an F and I have some augmentation in GF, and then I get F prime and I look at GF prime. There exists F prime such that and vertex B such that the shortest path's length from S to V is strictly less than what it was from S to V in F. And suppose V is the closest vertex to S with that property. So we'll arrive at contradiction. It will be very similar to, oh, you need to flow this way and use some properties of shortest paths and we'll get contradiction. Okay. So let's say in GF prime, so here is V and maybe the H before V was U. U could be S for all I care. So then delta F prime, oh, I've been using delta or a D. S U is equal to dF prime of SV minus 1. U is the vertex just before V in GF prime in the shortest path from S to V. Then the shortest path from S to U is nothing but S to V minus 1. And I know that this is greater than or equal to dFSU. That the shortest path in F prime from S to U is greater than or equal to this. Why is this? I assume V is the closest vertex that violates this property. So that means for U, which is closer than V to S, does not violate the property. So for U, in f prime, its distance is greater than or equal to this. Okay. And delta f prime SV, by this assumption, is strictly less than df SV minus 1. Okay. So that means in f, the shortest path from S to U is strictly less than shortest path from S to V minus 1. Okay. In f prime, it's exactly the same. S to U is equal to SV minus 1. But in f, S to U is strictly less than S to V minus 1. This implies that UV is not in the residual network of GF. Is that clear? So I'm claiming that in GF, this edge UV is not there. Why? Because if it had been there, the shortest path from S to V, S to U plus 1, or shortest path from S to V would be less than or equal to shortest path from S to U plus 1, right? We have that it is actually opposite, right? As otherwise, dfsv would be less than or equal to dfsu plus 1. If uv had been an edge in the residual network, one way to reach S to V is through U. So you can get to S to U plus 1. There may be other ways. So the shortest path from S to V in F would have been like this. But we just argued that dfsv is strictly greater than dfsu plus 1. Okay, so UV is not in GF. Now, how did that happen? UV was not in GF, but it is in GF prime. Then you have something similar like this, that there must have been a flow in the direction of V to U, right? So this edge in GF, this edge was not there. But in GF prime, I had the edge S, U, and then T. So that means in between, there was a flow from V to U. Okay, actually this is immediately after. Yeah, this is immediately after. So there is no in between. So I augmented, and then I got f prime, and then I'm doing this. So what does that mean? In GF itself, this edge must have been there. Right? I augmented a flow, and then I got an f prime, and then I'm looking at the residual network, and I argued that suppose S to V is shorter than less than this, then we are deriving all this, right? So we argued that in this UV is not there. So how did UV come here? That means in this flow, in the augmentation, VU was there in GF, right? So that means you sent some flow through this. That means that this was part of the shortest path from S to T. So the distance in F from S to U is equal to distance from S V plus 1. So distance in F SV is equal to df SU minus 1, which is less than or equal to because in F prime S to U we know is increasing, right? V was the closest vertex, but F prime SU is F prime SV minus 1. Yeah, so in fact we went through this when we were trying to prove lemma 2. which is that this edge was not there in GF, we argued, because of whatever calculations we had. But it came back in GF prime means that there must have been a flow through this. So VF edge was in the residual network, and it was also the shortest path augmentation. That's why you could bring back UV here. Okay? So that means that the length of the shortest path from S to V is length of the shortest path from S to U minus 1, because this is part of the shortest path. But this is less than or equal to, in F prime, the distance is monotonically increasing. And dF prime SU is dF prime SV minus 2. So what have we arrived at? The distance from S to V in F prime is greater than or equal to S to V plus 2. It contradicts this. We said that in S prime it actually decreased, but that's not true. Okay, so that concludes the proof of lemma 1 and concludes the running time analysis of Edmonds-Scott. So all it says is if you just augment through shortest ST path, then your running time is independent of the max flow or capacities, whatever numbers you have. You never need to do more than mn different augmentations, and each augmentation takes order m times, overall m square n. Right, so this could be, in the worst case, n power 5, right? Because m can be as bad as n square. Yeah, I mean, we saw that even though the standard Ford-Fulkerson running time depended on F star, it didn't matter for some of the applications we star, because wherever we can bound F star by function of m or n. Okay, but if you cannot, but then this may be okay. But later on, in the next lecture, we will improve this algorithm even better through a completely different approach. So we will depart from Ford-Fulkerson. Ford-Fulkerson algorithm is simply find an augmenting path, augment. However way you want, maybe you will find, there are approaches where you will find in parallel lots of augmenting paths and augment by them. Big bottleneck capacity, shortest path, there are many variations of this. And the next algorithm we will see, I'll just sort of tell the idea and we'll do next time.
Sir.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that we use the closest vertex to S.
Which violates this property.
In which graph?
In F prime. In GF prime. In GF prime. Because we are assuming that, because SU, for example, does not violate this. So in F prime. Yep. Okay, so next time, in fact, not next time, next week or so or later, we will look at linear programming where, so one way to think of this Ford-Fulkerson algorithm is that I always have a feasible flow. I move towards optimality. And optimality is when there is no augmenting path. Okay? The other kind of approach we're going to use to design this algorithm is sometimes called primal dual in the LP approach. The Ford-Fulkerson type of algorithm always have a feasible I mean, what do I mean by feasible flow? You have to satisfy those two constraints, capacity constraints and conservation constraints. That's, think, if you know LP, just think in terms of I'm modeling some constraints. These are the two constraints, capacity constraints and conservation constraint. I always want to maintain those constraints so that as long as any flow that maintains it, I call it a feasible flow. And I eventually reach optimality, move towards optimality. And what is the optimality constraint? No ST path in GF. Okay. Now, the next algorithm we will see, which is actually called pre-flow push. It's an interesting paradigm by itself that always maintain optimality. That is, yeah, and move towards feasibility. Okay. So which means that at any point of time, I really may not have a flow. I may not satisfy the conservation constraint. I'll only satisfy the capacity constraint. I may not satisfy the conservation constraint. And the moment but always I'll maintain that there is no ST path in my residual network. Okay, whatever that means. Right? You can. So it's called a pre-flow. It's not a flow. I always have a pre-flow, which is some relaxation of the flow. By relaxation, I mean relax the conservation constraint. I don't have to conserve. The moment I have reached conservation, I will stop, because then, since I'm always maintaining optimality, I'll stop. So how does the algorithm proceed and how do I maintain optimality? I start from S and saturate every edge going out of S. Okay, that means push as much flow out of every edge going out of S. Right? This is the maximum you can do, so you might push it. Okay. Now, if you take the residual network, you will have no edge out of S in the residual network, right? Because every edge out of S is saturated. So there won't be ST path. Okay, so you will have optimality. When I start off, I will push as much as possible from every edge out of S. So I will not have ST path in the residual network. So in a sense, I am maintaining optimality, but I am not feasible because I'm not satisfying conservation constraints. Every edge, every node out of S, those nodes have now some flow. We need to push them. I may not be able to push them back through some other edges. So I will try and find some systematic way of pushing this excess flow out of nodes. Eventually, the conservation constraints are satisfied. I always maintain optimality. I reach feasibility and stop. Okay, so that's a kind of a pre-flow push algorithm, and that gives you even better than the MN algorithm we saw. So we eventually will get an N-cubed algorithm through this approach. Okay, so that's for next time. Yeah, don't have time to start.